Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate your making the schedule available when I sent you a note saying that I was going to be uh, commemorating 50 years of sobriety last Thursday. Interestingly enough, I celebrated it in silence on a retreat with, with a number of meditation teachers. Um, but I have what has interested me the most about getting sober, staying sober, and the beginning of my, spiritual path was the day that I called AA to the day that I called AA. Um, I by the time I ended drinking, I would start the day with a juice glass full of whiskey, and I would continue drinking during the day. And I would end the day with a juice glass full of whiskey, and sometimes I had barbiturates along with it. And I didn't think the chances of my making it to 30 were very good. And I pride myself on having pretty good judgment, and I think that was probably a pretty reasonable assessment that the odds were not great. Um, and on August 22nd, 1974, I picked up the phone and I called AA. And to this day, I have no idea why. I didn't know anything about AA. I didn't know anybody in AA. I actually didn't know they didn't drink in AA. Um, I didn't, I had not tried to stop drinking. I had not tried to cut back. And yet I called AA. The guy on the other end of the phone told me not to drink for the rest of the day, which I thought was ridiculous. But the next morning I woke up, had a cup of coffee, drove over to the house of someone who was going to be my sponsor. Um, and my responsibility took over then. And I never could figure out why I called when I called. And I used to use the sort of bland word grace to describe it. I now think of it in terms of chesed v'rachamim, God's love and God's compassion for me. Um, but it was clearly, it was not of my making, but the next day was. Um, and um, many years later, I learned mindfulness meditation and have been involved with the Institute for probably nearly as long as the Institute's been around. My first meetings on the board were when Rachel was still with us, and we used to meet around her dining room table. Um, but I've learned that mindfulness meditation is a mental discipline of of allowing us to see what is true in the moment. And I didn't have any mental discipline when I got sober. That was clearly a miracle. But I do believe that those moments occur in my life and our life more often than we recognize. You might call it serendipity. You might um, some sort of passing thought, and and the practice of mindfulness um, allows me to notice when these things happen in my life. And without the practice of mindfulness, those moments of serendipity would just go by. And you could think back over your life, the important things that happened that you noticed and were able to act on, and the maybe the things that you didn't act on because you didn't notice them. So I have thought for the last 20 some years that the practice of simply sitting and following my breath and paying attention to my body is a core practice in allowing me to engage in my life and to know to see what's actually happening in my life. So um, I would invite you, we have a little bit of time to sit, and you can forget everything I said, because that's not really important. That's my story. The only thing that's really important is that we're able to develop a practice of paying attention. And if we're able to pay attention, if I'm able to pay attention, I'm able to engage in my life in far more meaningful ways. Um, So I'll stop with that, and I will just invite you to sit in a comfortable and upright manner. Back in the 70s, when people were beginning to learn to meditate in this country, some of the teachers said things like meditate as if your hair was on fire, meditate with intensity. Um, I've always liked the phrase that I learned from John Kabat-Zinn, which is sit as if your life depends upon it, because it does. So sitting comfortably and upright, let your feet sit comfortably on the floor, hands in your lap, palms up or palms down, head upright if you're comfortable, letting your eyes close. And once you let your eyes close, notice that you're breathing. Just see if you can follow one entire breath from the intake to the exhale. Or notice that your body is sitting. I don't often do full body scans, but sometimes I'll just notice my feet or my legs or my arms and my breath. Just here, just sitting, just breathing.
Larry, do you want to close here, or you turn it over to me here?
You're in charge, Mark.
Okay, okay, thank you, Larry. I want to thank you so much for first of all, Mazal Tov on 50 years. That's really so inspirational. And friends, we seal that practice as we do each day, offering an opportunity for those of you who are in mourning or observing a yard site, or if you want to just join us in the cottage to do so. And if you're not, then please stay present for those who are. And you can put the name or names of those you're honoring in the chat now or afterwards. And if you're joining me for cottage, please rise in body or in spirit, and you can unmute at this time. Yitkadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah. Bialma, Dibra, Chirute, Biamlich, Malchute, V'chayechon, Uvyomechon, Uvchaye Dechal Beit Yisrael, Va'agala, Ankari, V'Yivru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Barach, Ram Lamecha Haya, Yitbarach, V'Yishtabach, Ha'ar, V'Yitramam, V'Yaseh, V'Yitgadar, V'Yitachal Shmei La'ela min kol birchata v'shmata ushbachata v'nechamata v'amiram ba'alma v'yivru amen. Yehi shlama rava v'shmaya v'chaim v'kol Yisrael
Amen.
shalom b'mamav v'aseh shalom v'Yisrael v'yalkol yoshvei
Amen.
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 Friends, thanks so much for joining us today. And if you're leaving us now, please join us tomorrow. David Gottlieb will be leading us in practice tomorrow. And on Friday, Zach Newman of Hamakom will lead us to help us sit together into Shabbat. And look forward to both those sessions if you can join us, or you're welcome to stay on for a conversation with Larry Yermack. And if you have a question you'd like to ask Larry, please put it in the chat. Preface it by writing question in caps, and I will try to work your question into the conversation. So Larry, let me bring you in here. And thank you so much, Larry. And again, Mazal Tov. It's an amazing accomplishment. I'm really eager to have this conversation. First off, I want to ask you the question, since you have extensive experience in mindfulness meditation, having done JMMTT, and I think you also, if I'm not mistaken, did the John Kabat-Zinn MBSR, correct?
I did some training with MBSR and also a program called Search Inside Yourself, which is mindfulness and emotional intelligence.
Okay, so my question for you is, what role has meditation played for you in your recovery program? The step 11 of the 12 steps says that we sought through prayer and meditation to increase our conscious contact with God as we understood God, and praying only for
knowledge of God's will for us and the power to
carry that out. Okay. So maybe you can speak to that step a little bit about meditation and the role that has played for you for these 50 years.
I have always thought, thank you for that. And I was actually thinking about the 11th step. You read my mind. I've always thought that the 11th step is in and of itself a complete spiritual program.
Mm-hmm.
It really does explain all we need to do on a daily basis. The only technical quarrel I have with it is when Bill Wilson wrote the 12 and 12, he didn't have a concept of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
His concept of meditation was contemplation. He talked about reading a prayer and thinking deeply about each word. So I'm assuming that if Bill wrote this book in 1975 and not 1935, he would have had a different idea about what meditation was.
Mm-hmm.
And I also go back to conversations that I had with Rachel of blessed memory. And Rachel always said that meditation essentially is the ground upon which we walk. That then it is the most fundamental practice. Unless we're paying attention and we're awake, all the other stuff doesn't count. So
Mhm.
the prayer is wonderful, but if you're just singing some words or all the other great programs you do in IJS, if you're not able to pay attention to them, they're not going to get you anywhere. So this is it. This is the basic muscle that we need to exercise, the paying attention muscle.
Yeah. A lot of questions in the chat. So maybe just take that another step in terms of another principle of recovery, surrender. And it strikes me that, mindfulness meditation is a surrender practice. That is, we're surrendering. It's really cultivating a stance of being open to what's happening and allowing life to unfold rather than try to control it. So I wonder if that resonates with you in terms of the role of surrender in recovery and this practice.
Honestly, I never thought about any parallels there. So thank you for raising it. I mean, clearly, all 12-step programs start with I'm powerless over whatever it is that I'm powerless over. My life had become unmanageable.
Mhm.
And then in, I don't know, the second step or the third step, turning our lives and our wills over to the care of God. Um,
Mhm.
so, it is fundamental to recovery.
Mhm.
So I guess I never thought about it as fundamental to spiritual growth because I figured I already gave up to get here. Um, and I guess the question you're raising is if someone is not in recovery, um, what is the nature of surrendering to that which is?
Yeah.
Um, and I think um, the nature of meditation is in fact accepting the reality of what is, whether it's good or bad, whether it's painful or whether it's not.
Right.
You probably have the same experience I have. You lead a meditation and someone says, "That was a wonderful meditation. I was so calm. I was so quiet." And the response is, "Well, that's nice, but you might have a meditation and you might be thoroughly miserable because all of a sudden you're facing something that's in your life that you didn't want to deal with, that just shows up." So, it is a practice of it is in fact, I think you're correct. It is in fact the practice of turning it over.
Um, uh, Here's a question I want to share from Shimon Siegel. As someone who has practiced Kabbalistic Yehudim and Yoga Tantra visualization for close to 40 years, any suggestions for how to just sit and keep my mind from looking for an active practice whenever I sit? Maybe Steve, Shimon need to clarify looking for an active practice. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Also, were you at Santa Sabina last week for your silent retreat? I know the answer to that is yes. Um, so Steve, maybe you can clarify that question. I don't know if that question is, um, oh, okay. Here's a discipline. It was a question about clarifying what you meant by discipline versus miracle in your sobriety.
Um, well, in my life, I saw that the miracle occurring before the discipline, in
Hmm.
the sense that when I woke up the next day and I didn't drink and I had a cup of coffee and I went
Hmm.
over to see somebody, I was clearly taking conscious actions on my own behalf.
Right.
Uh, and a lot of people that get sober and don't stay sober, a lot of people that get into 12-step programs and, fall off because they don't, sort of, do this a step at a time. I think that the really interesting part of your question, and I think we all struggle with it, is the question, the, hear meditation teachers talking about the practice of meditation is the practice of settling and concentrating the mind. Um, and I heard one of my teachers once say that he had sat for years and years and years, and he only can recall one half-hour sit when he just followed his breath and didn't have a random thought.
Hmm.
This This gives me great comfort since he's one of my teachers. I want to identify, want out him on this call. It's very hard. Sitting is not easy. You know, the discipline of sitting is actually to notice when I've had a random thought and to bring my attention back to my breath. The alternative is to just sit in the 35 millimeter, movie and watch it go on for 20 minutes and say, oh, that was interesting. Ding. So that's the discipline. The discipline is to notice when we go off. Whereas one of my teachers said, you sit, you follow your breath. When you've been distracted from your breath, you come back to it and you repeat it 1 billion times.
I do want to, I hope it won't be too personal, but I don't think it is necessarily. You were describing, that key moment in your 20s. You described it as serendipitous. I think in recovery speak, people might talk about it as a higher power moment, right? Where whatever it was that led you to make that phone call. And by the way, I think it's fabulous that you didn't know that people didn't drink in AA. I love that.
Never called. I mean, come on.
I mean, who doesn't drink? They must drink there too. So
alcoholics.
Right.
The first word.
Right. So what I got from what you were saying was that part of the mindfulness practice is that we're trying to be awake to those moments, the serendipitous moments, higher power moments. And in that step 11, the purpose of the meditation is to increase conscious contact with God, which in Jewish terms, I would say the term that correlates to that in Jewish mystical tradition is dveikut, which literally means cleaving, contact, being in contact with the divine. So I just wanted to ask you if you're comfortable sharing, like what that means to you, what the higher power, how do you, it's God as we understand God, like how does that function for you in terms of meditation? And is it similar to prayer? Is meditation a kind of prayer? I don't know if you have a personal sense of God or a non-personal sense of God or the sacred. Maybe sometimes you do, maybe sometimes you don't. I don't know. Just wanted to ask you about that. Your higher.
That's an easy question, Mark. I'm sure we could all.
Good. We've got 3 minutes, Larry.
I've come to believe in AA, and I've learned in IJS a non-dualistic view of divinity, and divinity is a lot easier word to people to grasp than God. And so the focus of my practice, the reason I like being in rooms with other people, the reason I go to synagogue on Shabbat, is that I truly believe that we are all connected, and that God is transcendent, but God is also immanent. God is around us. Everything is God and nothing but God. My favorite word on Shabbat is ein od. Favorite 2 words. There's nothing besides God.
Right. Everything is God.
Everything is God. So my practice, to the extent that I can do it, is to try to feel my connection to other people, and to cultivate compassion, or to put it another way, there are those that many will say that the clear result of an awareness practice by itself is increased compassion. And I have slowly but surely noticed these little occasional glimmers of compassion for others, walking down the street and seeing the pain in someone else's face. So for me, it's being with others, and it's recognizing that I'm part of humanity.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I think for a lot of people who are in, we're 12-step recovery, I see there's, some mentioning in the chat about people who struggle with the language about God or higher power or surrendering will, etc. And for many, I think the community, the people, the fellowship, synagogue or recovery serves that purpose. That is the higher power, so to speak, something greater than oneself, basically. Really, I guess what it boils down to, right? Having a sense of being. So I was actually thinking in terms of being in your 20s, that actually developmentally, that's a natural stage, I think, for kind of moving through adolescence into this sense of being part of something bigger than oneself, right?
Well,
Maybe
we
that was
we
the right
know
time,
that the prefrontal cortex doesn't even fully come online till our
right?
mid-20s.
Right,
So it
right,
sort of came online around the same time I got sober, and
right,
I didn't mention it, and I don't have any more time, but it
right,
didn't take me very long in AA to realize that I was Jewish and seek out a path
right.
back to the synagogue.
Oh, that's a whole nother
So
topic.
my Jewish trip has been nearly 50 years long as well.
Wow, oh, that's great. I'm glad you mentioned that. Well, we could go on for quite a while, Larry. It's a lot of questions, a lot of appreciation, and a lot of congratulations for you. One the other overlap between meditation and recovery is the sense of one day at a time, 1 minute, 1 hour at a time, 1 minute at a time, one breath at a time. So may it continue for many years, a day at a time, minute at a time. And thanks for sharing. Thanks for the courage of sharing your example, which I hope will inspire many others as well. And just thank you so much for leading us today.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Great. Thanks everyone for being here. And Natalie,
Take
thank
care,
you for
everyone.
holding our space today. Hope to see you tomorrow to practice with David Gottlieb, everyone. Be well.